Welcome to the shop. Today I'm going to be talking about how I built this baby Yoda Hover Pram. Check it out here. Alright, let's go. So, first off, we get this kid's rocker chair that I found at Big Lots. It was pretty inexpensive and just the shape I needed. Some of the plastic melted onto the bit here, so we had to clip that off. And we're going to cut off the bottom here with the Dremel tool. Keep going at it, and use some hand tools to even out the bottom. Now the plastic chair size is fine, but the bottom part needs to be built up to make that egg shape. This is a hanging planter that I got at Home Depot. This next part I'm going to have to fabricate is aluminum that just kind of bent into shape and screwed together to create the oval. This will be the chassis, basically. These are a couple metal construction straps that will go along the bottom and distribute the weight. Next, I found this serving bowl from Party City and used a wood burning tool to basically cut it in half. Make sure you have some protective equipment because those vapors can be pretty toxic. Used a heat gun here to slightly change the shape of the serving bowl to match the curvature of the planter. In order to make the bottom shape, so I thought I might be able to use this mesh, but it was too difficult. It may have worked with some thinner chicken wire, but this stuff was just too thick. You see me forming it here, but it's just not going to work. So I abandoned that process. Instead, we'll be using EVA foam, so I got some exercise mats, cut those into shapes. Using a heating gun here to make it rounder. Using all the skills I learned playing Tetris to fill out all the blocks. EVA foam is pretty pliable when it's heated, so I'm using an iron here to make it round and kind of make that egg shape. The plastic rocker chair still had these dividers in the middle, so these pieces needed to fit perfectly. I'll use some rubber cement to glue these down. Using a file here to make all the edges as smooth as possible. And we'll need to fill in all these bits, so this is something called FOMO. It's a multiple foam that you can use to fill in all these areas. I found some drywall joint tape, and this is going to give it the texture it needs to let the auto body filler adhere to it later. Every inch would need to be covered up, so I could start adding material to build up that smooth finish later. I'm going to use some glue here to kind of harden it up. There'll be multiple layers of this. We'll be feeding it along with a heat dryer. The main shell of the pram is going to be constructed of this short strand fiberglass filler. It's a two-part process. You mix it together and it hardens. This stuff is pretty similar to Bondo. It dries pretty quickly, but it starts off pretty rough, so you're going to need to sand after you apply, then cover up the patches, and then resand again, probably a few times. And as another reminder, like with a lot of the materials here, be sure you're wearing some protective equipment because the fumes and the dust can be dangerous, so make sure you're protecting your hands and your lungs. Mix up, apply, sand, and repeat. The texture here kind of looks like the title font to the Bad Batch. I kind of liked it, but this is all going to get smoothed out. Here I've cut some thin EVA foam sheets to give that extra ridge of texture, and we're going to be using XTC 3D, which is a brush-on coating for 3D printed parts, and it's self-leveling, and it's a two-part process you mix together. It's an epoxy resin that works really well to smooth out a lot of imperfections. Once it's dried overnight, the finish is like a smooth shell, but the parts that dripped will need to be clipped off, like here. going to be moving on to the hood, and that's the hanging planter, cutting it in half. Sanding off a little bit of the edge of the lip here to make it smoother. The material on the planter is actually pretty soft, so I'm able to use an X-Acto knife to cut into it to make these tabs on the tops. These notches here will let the hood have just a little bit of movement once it's attached to the main base of the pram. I'm going in there with filler again to smooth out the edges, letting it dry, harden, and add some more PVA glue here. Here's the first base coat of primer now that the resin has hardened. Next I'll add the band of foam that goes around the middle, cut it out, and also cut the strips that'll go on the inside later. These interior greebles are actually made out of applesauce containers. Wasn't really hungry, but I had to. I cut out these shapes to fit accordingly. Added foam shapes, cut with a hot tin lid here, and painted with acrylic. The shipping tube was exactly the right size to fit these lids, and here are some other large lids that I saved. I'm going to cut them out, and they're also going to go on the sides. This here is a epoxy clay putty called Magic Sculpt, which I indented these shapes in with a wood file, and now I'm going to sand all these areas to smooth out all the details. Here I'm using some giant Disneyland buttons that have the perfect shape to go on the sides. It's a pretty thin metal. Drilling a hole in it, and then putting the blade of the scroll saw in there and cutting out a knockout shape. I'm going to do that twice. Once that's done, I have to use a metal file to make sure that all the burrs are gone and not sharp, dangerous. I painted some foam, put that as the backing, and using some hot glue to fill in the seams. These are some clips that I bent into shape and will hold the hood into place. Next I'm going to attach the little hubcaps that go on the side and drilling those into place. This is for the interior foam lining, and it's going to be cut at an angle so it fits perfectly into here. And again, using some rubber cement to stick in there. Once that's adhered, I'll use the same tool I used to make some of the shapes on the side accents to create these little divots in the foam. Next, I heated it up and made little indentations all along the interior foam shape. Here we can see the foam melted unevenly, and once we applied the primer, it started to crack. So we went back to the moldable foamo and made some better indentations. Here are the metal screws for the sides, and that's going to get it ready for the magnetic holders. And then here we're using acrylic to paint it red. There's a few accents all around the hood, so now I'm going to cut out those shapes. Peel that right off. There's a couple of these details around the pram, and they'll get painted too. Next I'm going to add the switch with the 3 squares on the front. This is also made out of EVA foam. I've used bathtub caulking to smooth out the seams between the foam here. Here I'm adding another layer of the primer. And we're going to paint the whole thing silver. Once everything that is silver is dried, we're going to mask out some areas. It's going to be the distressed areas, make it look like it's weathered. This is the Plastidip, and it's going to even out all the textures again. The edges on the interior foam parts are masked off, and we're going to paint it again with some acrylic. The final white color. Once the paint is dried, you can peel away all the areas that would look like it's metal underneath. I initially added a little bit too much of the weathered paint chip textures, so I went back in for a second coat and made it a little bit more white. I needed something with even spacing, so I used a bunch of Sharpies lying around to space out the foam for the interior lining. This is just some watered down acrylic. Now I'm going in and adding some more weather texture. It's pretty fun to see what random shapes show up. There's one that looks like New Jersey. This one looks like Guam. There's California. Finally, gonna screw in the side bits, and voila. The magnets will hold that right into place. And almost there, painting in a few more details of grit to build that lived-in universe. And there you go. Now we go to Hover Pram. Thanks to the other makers out there whose videos I watched to get inspiration to figure out the process and methods they used. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below, and I'll be happy to help. And the finishing touch, I think, would be some fabric for the child. Oh, here, that's my child. Unfortunately, she grew so fast that she doesn't fit it anymore, lengthwise. But this one does. This was a compilation of months of work, tinkering here and there, but here you can see the final product. And here is the workshop in which it was built by the skill of my hands. I hope you've enjoyed watching the process. I myself am pretty happy with the result. I have spoken. To see more art and design, follow me on Instagram and Facebook. Sketchboy01 and Kitten Rivet.